afternoon, folks. My name is Jessica Brooks. I'm the service hydrologist here at the National Weather Service in the Quad Cities. It is 1 minute after 1 as I see on my clock, so we'll get started. So today I'm going to give you our update on our spring flood outlook. It is the third iteration of our outlook for this spring season. So let's get started here. So if you haven't been to one of our Outlook webinars, these are the factors we look at as we're going through our spring flood categorization. So I'm not going to focus too much on this slide, but those are the things that we look at every spring to give you what your risk is for flooding every year. So the main takeaways with this outlook is that we have had a gradual snowmelt occur, and that has reduced our flood risk for the coming spring season. As we look at the individual riverways, our Mississippi River is near to below normal for most of the Mississippi River, but we do have a slightly above normal chance for flooding, and mainly minor flooding downstream of the Quad Cities. On our local rivers, the risk is near to below normal, again, as we have lost all that snowpack, but we still do have a risk for flooding, mainly on the lower Rock and the lower Wapsipinicon rivers, which get a little too later, but we do actually have some ongoing flooding on the lower Wapsipinicon River as we speak today. Our flood risk is highest for minor flooding. Risk is lower for reaching those higher category flooding levels, but overall risk is much lower than we've seen in the previous couple of years. Again, snowpack has largely melted across the whole region, and it all melted at a very slow pace. And this slow snow melt kept all our rises fairly minimal with respect to what we could have seen if it would have melted very fast. So most rises we've seen have been staying within banks, which has been great for us for this year. Now, with the loss of the snowpack and our rises expected to stay below flood stage for most areas, our flood risk is going to be tied to future precipitation this spring. So as we potentially get more snow or potentially get heavy rains here over the coming month or two. Our soil moisture remains near to below normal, and our ground is thawing. So these factors are greatly reducing our flood risk as we go into spring, as our soils are going to have capacity to hold water with any future precipitation we have. So looking at our precipitation for the season, going up through the end of February, so our main winter months, we did see near to above normal precipitation across the area. Mainly the area that we had our heavy snow was the area that had above normal precipitation, with the remainder of the region having below normal precipitation. Looking at the first 10 days of March, we've had some precipitation, but not a whole lot, especially locally. Locally, we actually have had below normal precipitation, and you do see in the upper parts of the Mississippi River Basin, they did see some precipitation, but it wasn't on a whole terribly much. Our ground has thawed quite a bit in the past couple of weeks. So this is a comparison of 2 weeks ago to yesterday. So you see a lot more of these red icons, meaning 0 to 3 inches. A lot of those are at 0. So we have lost the frozen ground across much of the local area. And as you see, that's creeping northward too. There is still frozen ground up in the further northern parts of the upper Mississippi River Basin, but that ground is definitely thawing as well with the warmer weather we've seen in the past couple of weeks. All right, so looking at soil moisture, I said we continue to see below normal or near normal soil moisture across the area. see as a comparison from 2 weeks ago, which is your lower right image on the screen, compared to a couple days ago when this image was pulled. You see it looks like it's drier, which may not make sense or doesn't seem to make sense with the snow melt that we've seen. Something to think about is that we did have frozen ground as a lot of that snow was melting. So a lot of that snow melt did become runoff instead of being able to soak into the ground and create some moisture in those top levels of the soil. And also as we get, this is a percentile. So as we get into the spring months, it is typical that we would have more moisture in the soil. So it is kind of comparing slightly different numbers. But overall, you know, we're not looking at soil conditions that have greatly seen a lot of moisture get into them over the past couple weeks, even with the snow melt that occurred. So we're still looking at near to even below normal soil moisture here as we go into spring. Okay, so talking about our snow cover, you know, this is what we've been talking about all up till this point, is that was going to be our big kicker to potentially giving us flooding this spring. Well, we melted all of that snow nearly. I mean, there is some snow up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, you know, the far reaches of the upper Mississippi River watershed. But those amounts are not overly high, and it's very limited in area. So nothing that's going to cause a big impact as we go into spring, from what we're looking at today anyway. So the way this snow all melted, and we had, again, 2 weeks ago, we still had 2 to 4 inches of water in that snow, but we saw it melt very slowly. It took about 2 weeks to get all of that snow to melt, and the favorable nature of it just allowed that water all to gradually get into the river systems instead of simultaneously all at once, which would have caused higher rises in our rivers. So so this is what we're looking at. I mean, this has been you know, extremely favorable and a good thing to see, as with even all that moisture, we are just seeing mostly in-bank rises along most of our rivers. So we are seeing these rises happening ongoing as we speak here, especially on our local rivers, as we're seeing some areas have peaked already, some are expected to peak here in the coming days. The Mississippi River will see a slight delay as that water works its way through all these different tributary systems and gets into the main stem Mississippi. So looking at you know, rises really starting to happen here soon. But are we going to see flooding happening on the Mississippi River? The likelihood with just this snow melt coming through is not high. More than likely, as we're kind of getting a good gauge of all this water coming into the system, is that most areas on the Mississippi are even going to see within bank rises here if we wouldn't happen to get any additional rainfall in the next coming weeks. So talking about what the snowmelt has done to our area rivers. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, this map was colored with more greens and oranges and even some more reds as we had river levels running at near to below normal flows for this time of year. But with all that snow melt, we've seen rises, as you can see, as a whole along the upper Mississippi River Basin, as this chart indicates. We've gone to above normal for across the whole region. So, and that's just a case to all the meltwater getting into the rivers. What is good to see, though, is that the rivers were able to handle all that meltwater, and that's why you're seeing just above normal and much not above normal, and not necessarily the high flows that would correspond with more flooding happening. So what do we have going on right now? So these are the only locations in our area that we're seeing high flows happening as we speak today. So these are limited to the Pecatonica River, which is a tributary of the Rock River, and then on the lower Rock. And right now we're looking at levels getting near the peak on those rivers. The Rock River near Joslin is going to get really close to reaching or to hitting that flood stage of 12 feet, but right now we're thinking it might stay just under, so no flood warning for there at this point. And then on the Iowa side, we do have some minor to maybe moderate flooding. We're getting close to moderate flooding on the lower Wapsipinicon River. And then we do have some higher levels being observed on the lower Iowa River. But again, these locations we're expecting at this current time to stay below flood stage. So when is the peak crest anticipated for the Mississippi River? So we're looking at levels peaking anywhere between March 18th and April 7th. That's using the current information that we have, looking at potential precipitation in the future, and the meltwater coming down through the tributaries right now. That could likely change, or could easily change, I should say, if our precipitation pattern changes from what we've currently been looking at. But that's been watching things over the past week. That timing is what looks more likely with this snowmelt crest coming through. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean flooding. It may very well not mean flooding for almost the entire area. But as we continue to go on through the spring, if we get some heavy rain coming across the region, we could get additional peaks coming through the river system as we go through spring. But this is just with all that water that was coming from the snow, these are the times that we would anticipate that peak coming, whether that's just the snow melt itself or if we have additional rain that gets brought into it here in the coming weeks. Now, to talk about what we're expecting for rainfall in the coming weeks, this is our 7-day forecast. I wanted to bring this in. Usually this is just an outlook, but as we are talking about current high river levels and the peak snowmelt water coming through the Mississippi, I wanted to touch on what we're expecting over the coming week. This is our current thoughts, with most of the precipitation staying south of our area. But we are looking at a pretty active pattern here coming in the next couple of weeks. And does that mean we're going to get hit by much rain or snow? The models have been kind of going back and forth on where those heavier precipitation areas are going to be. But that's something we'll be watching closely in the coming weeks. But at the current time, this is our 7-day rainfall forecast, which again is going to be favorable for us, keeping most of the heavier precipitation to the south. Looking at the week 2, we see that we're being favored for above normal temperatures. This is for the 18th to the 24th of March. And then kind of in this near normal to below normal favorability for precipitation. But again, I think there's some variability with what's going to be happening with these storm systems coming through over the coming weeks. And as you all are aware, I'm sure, spring is the time where we do get some intense storm systems to come through, and active weather is not an anomaly at all. So it's just going to be something we'll have to watch here over the coming weeks. Looking at the 3-month climate outlook, this is the same as 2 weeks ago. So showing higher favorability for warmer temperatures and near to above normal precipitation on average through those 3 months. So to hit quickly on what are our outlooks for the next 3 months on the rivers. If you remember from 2 weeks ago, this looks fairly similar, but we have had the chances lowered pretty much everywhere, especially kind of in these areas. I think 2 weeks ago, the 50% chance of reaching moderate flood was being pinged for like the Lower Rock, and for the Mississippi from the Quad Cities downstream. So you see these areas on the Mississippi have seen improved outlooks for flooding potential. So I'm bringing in the 75th percent chance. So these are areas that we have that have the highest risk for flooding. Now, is this necessarily above normal? No, these are pretty close, maybe slightly above what we would normally see. But again, we're only hitting on the Lower Rock and the Lower Wapsipinicon River for areas that we have a high probability to see flooding occur. And then just to touch on, our lower probabilities. So again, this is going to be dependent on having some heavy rains come in over the coming months to cause higher river levels and bring flooding across the area. So you obviously see more colored boxes, so more chances for moderate flood levels to be hit. But what's good to see is we don't have a lot of areas that are having a 25% chance of reaching major flood stage. So that's just a signal that we do have a lower risk for reaching those extreme flood levels this spring. So again, just to sum everything up, our chances for flooding have been reduced over the last 2 weeks because we have had that snow all melt, and it melted slowly. We still have some drier soils across the area, so that's going to be a limiting factor in reducing our flood risk this spring. We do have rivers coming up right now, but the occurrence of additional flooding and worse flooding, or so the severity getting higher and more severe, is going to be determined by future spring precipitation, as a lot of the rivers right now are expected to not even reach flood stage with the ongoing snow melt water getting through the systems. And I didn't even really touch on this because I didn't have to, but I'm going to mention it quick. But our rivers are ice-free, so we do not have risk for ice jams, and that's a pretty great thing. We have not had any ice jam flooding this year, and so to see a year with no ice jams has been really great. So with that, we aren't putting any scheduled additional outlooks for flood risks for this spring season. We will keep our website updated as we go through the spring, and so feel free to check that website out, or the North Central River Forecast Center's website out if you have questions, or you can contact me at any time. My email address is there, or call our office. I can take any questions. If anyone has any specific questions, I can try to show you or bring some things up or answer any questions. All right, Brian asked if we are putting out a news release. We have our Spring Flood Outlook text product that was sent out earlier, but I will be sending out so like the same document types that I've sent out over the past couple outlooks. So those will be things that, yes, EMA can use to send out to your users for sure. That'll be coming out here in the next couple of hours as I finish that stuff up and get stuff sent out. So expect that here by the end of the day today. If you have any other questions, I'll stay on here for a couple minutes. So I will actually unmute you all. So I think people are unmuted if you do want to unmute yourself and ask a question. But otherwise, that's all I had for today. Thanks for coming and listening in to the good news. It's nice to give a favorable forecast after compared to the past few years. So, so yeah, that's all I have, and we'll see how the spring goes. So thanks again for coming.